this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. I am thrilled today to have Jason Jurado with us from One Path Coaching. We're going to learn more about his journey, his climb, and the work that he does. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talking with you today.
Oh, likewise. I have been wanting to get to know you better for a while. Thank you, LinkedIn.
Yes.
So tell the audience about yourself, what it is that you do, and who you help.
So my story is kind of a long story, but I'm going to shorten it for us, of course. My purpose is my calling, and I've had a calling as a healer ever since I was a small child. And for the sake of time and to be succinct, I'll just say that it was a calling that wasn't fulfilled. It was something that I always knew who I was, but it never was mentored or really acknowledged to an extent. There was talks here, a little bit here and there, like, oh, I have a great grandmother that was a medicine woman that my dad grew up with, and he would say sometimes, oh, he reminds me of grandma, but that was kind of the extent of it. And so I was kind of lost. So I had all of this, what I wanted to do and what I knew I should do, but no way to do it. So kind of that was just my life going through, and it never came to fruition. It just was who I was. And, I helped my friends out, and people came to me when they were upset, and I was always the one that, I knew when to talk, when to listen. That's very important in our world, mental health world. And so just kind of what I did. And then, I went in the Marine Corps, and people always ask me, well, why did you decide that? And that's a very challenging question, I think, for anyone that's ever served. My father, I have a long line of Marines and people in the military in my family, but that wasn't the reason. My father actually used to tell me and my older brother, if you're going to go in the service, go in the Air Force. Easier duty, etc. So, but it just was something I did, and I went in the Marine Corps right after I got out of high school. Spent 5 years there traveling the world, lived in Japan a few times, kind of was able to touch into my calling a little bit more there. Eastern religion and philosophy is something that's very important to me, and traveled the world, got to see a lot of other places, and that kind of stuck with me for a while, the travel bug and seeing other cultures. I'm really much... Relate on? Yes. You just were talking about that. Like I said, I'm jealous on your recent journeys. And then I went to work, and I just got a job after the Marine Corps, and that's kind of, I did a post today, an article today about life doesn't have an instruction manual, and we all just kind of try to figure it out. And I was just trying to figure it out. And so, well, what do? Well, you get a job, I guess, and you get a relationship of some sort. Mm-hmm. And I guess then you get married. And I kind of was just checking the boxes. And then you work really hard. And I was checking the boxes, but not living my life. And that had its own, that's a whole nother story in of itself of kind of how that came out to be and what that showed up with. And, the universe has a way of saying no. That's not quite it, Jason, and it kind of redirected me on my path.
What work were you doing at that time, just out of curiosity?
So I had jumped into, it's interesting. I found a way to do what I do. Retail leadership, to answer the question directly. And a lot of people that are in retail kind of aren't sure what they're doing. They're doing it partially. I worked with a lot of students, so a lot of people that were just getting out of high school, going into college, and they were trying to figure out their lives as well, which is my calling of helping people along that journey. So it just fit, and it allowed me to do what I do and be who I am within that scope. I was a trainer. I worked in HR for a while as well. So it was an opportunity to do what I want to do just enough to keep me engaged and in that level. But I always knew there was more. I always knew it was something else. But honestly, I hadn't really seen this calling being a career. It wasn't something that really showed up in that way for me. I just couldn't, it just was who I was and what I did, and I never really imagined it that. And as I got older and as I got into it more, it was like, this is what I need to do, this is what I should be doing from that level. But then things kept showing up. and my wife's my biggest supporter, and we've known each other for a lot of years. And I would come home from a really bad day, and she'd say, how many more signs does the universe need to give you that you need to go and do what your calling is and your career?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I get it, but there was, and this speaks to what I do now with people because of my journey. It speaks to, I had those limiting decisions, those limiting beliefs from the past that was holding me back, that was saying, well, you can't do this, and you don't do this, and it's not this, and you can't charge people to help them, and all these little things that are unconscious but direct us consciously. And so that was a huge part of my life, and we got to the point where it was time to make it happen. And I guess I should say, so my certifications are in neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, timeline therapy, and polyvagal theory. In the last year, I'm trained in polyvagal theory. And that's part of the journey. That just showed up. I around 2000, I was like, hey, if I'm going to do this, I need to have a toolbox to help people with. And I came across neurolinguistics, and it just kind of spoke to me. And then that journey continued, but reading books and watching videos, and then 2008 I started getting more serious and getting my certifications and stuff like that. 2015 I got my master practitioner. So another 3 weeks, another bunch of studying, and 150 hours of book work, and then 3 weeks in Henderson, Nevada, and I got that. And then I started seeing clients part-time at that time. And then 2 years ago, we moved from the San Francisco Bay Area inland to be closer to family. And it just worked out that I was able to then start full-time into my business. So I've been full-time for a little over 2 years now, seeing clients remotely and then doing events locally.
What an incredible journey. There is so much in there that number one, I can relate to, that two, I believe a lot of our audience can, and three, that I really want to delve into more. I'm trying to think of where to start. So you talk a lot about this calling and about signs. Can you share any of that? Because as someone who is extremely spiritual, but questions if I'm overlooking some of those, I am always so fascinated to hear how that shows up in other people's lives.
Definitely. And one of the challenges is in the world that you and I, we have a line where we meet. But the therapist side and the social worker side and that stuff, and then I am more towards the healing side and stuff like that. And so I always, know your audience, they say, and be aware of it. So I don't always dive into that as much, but you asked, and I'd love to share. It's just energy. I read energy. I read, people. I knew what people were kind of thinking in a sense, not reading their minds per se, but intuition was always really high for me. I see, like I said, I see energy. I'm able to, and like I said, I don't want to get too far off base for this conversation, and people be like, wait a minute, this isn't what I dialed into.
We're among friends here, okay? So I have a mother who is always very holistic. Right. We have a lot of practitioners in our practice that are, some that incorporate some of this in their therapeutic practice. So, I definitely am very open-minded, and I would hope that the listeners would be too. So feel free to share what you feel comfortable sharing.
Right. Thank you, and I appreciate that. I kind of, what I call plugging in, I was able to plug into people and hear their story, and that, and honestly, because like I said, because of not having mentorship and understanding, that scared me. That actually was frightening to see, and if you see spirits, you're like, whoa. And, honestly, things that I saw as a kid up until, 3 years ago, I didn't fully understand. And I was like, wait a minute. This is actually what you were seeing and hearing. It wasn't just your childhood imagination making it up, because things were showing up that way. So, feeling energy, being very empathetic. I have, empathy is something that I really connect with people, and it's just, it's there. It's funny. I always say part of my story is that I was so sensitive, I became hard. Because my generation, boys don't cry, and you don't show emotions, whatever. So where people think, oh, Jason's, he's so, I stuffed it all down and I became very stoic, very, stone faced, so hard. And then I went in the Marine Corps, so then there's that stigma, of that as well.
Yeah.
But I'm actually the most emotional one, in the family. And my family knows that, but for looking from the outside, people don't see that. And so I work on sharing that and, being very heart centric and leading with my heart so people can actually feel that's what's inside. And I've had people just recently that have, seen me in passing in different groups that I've had a good sit down with them after meeting them a couple, once or twice that said, you're a different person than I thought. You're so open and you're so kind and so that's something I work on, and that's unfortunately that was because of what we're supposed to do and who we're supposed to
Right.
be, and that's those limiting beliefs from when I was a young child. And so I got rid of that. So that's just part of who I am and what I do and what I see. And I, when I work with clients, even, I fought my wife for years. I pushed back on seeing people remotely, like on video, like she works in tech. So it's just normal to her. But prior to 2020, she was always saying, you should see clients virtually. No, I do energy work. It's about that connection. It's, I have to see them. And then 2020, I had no option. And now I see how it, and it works. And it's working
Yeah.
really well. And I'm helping people make those changes still and helping them on their path. But one thing is like when I'm working with someone, I kind of, and I'm not a channeler. I don't want to say at that level because that's not my thing. But I get inspired. I get in spirit, and it comes through me. And I'm helping a client, and to a point where sometimes I'm talking to a client, and you might have this too, where the client will say, "Oh, that was really profound," or whatever. What'd you just say? And I'm like, I have no idea. What were we talking about? And they'll repeat back, and then my conscious mind catches up and says, "Oh, yeah, I was talking about," and I kind of go from there. I kind of catch
Wow.
up, but it's usually something that it's like it's just coming through me, and I come always prepared. I just had this conversation yesterday. I always come prepared for each session. I can't imagine not going to a session not prepared, not having notes, not having what are we going to do? We're going to do some techniques, we're going to do some stuff, we're going to talk about this. But then what shows up shows up.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of it. But for me and my state of mind, I come in prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens, and I go from there.
Yeah.
But someone says, "Oh, have you ever tried coming in totally unprepared and just see what shows up?" And I'm like, "No, because I'd be freaking out."
Wow. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. It sounds like authenticity in its purest form. So, this transition for you. So, you talked about some early experiences, you touched upon some things that led you to where you are today. But this transition for you finding, I'm assuming that's where the business name came from, this one path, what you were meant to do, your calling. What was that moment or that turning point that finally made you take that leap with encouragement from your wife and those early experiences that you had that kind of shed the light?
Um, that's a great question because it was a moment. It was I can no longer walk away from this. I can no longer avoid this, and it's about giving back, and it's about being of service, and that's how I'm giving and being of service. And so it was selfish of me to not do it in an extent, and
Yeah.
not to be ego driven because like, oh, who am I? I'm a tour guide. I'm just here to help people. I help people along their path. And it's interesting, you mentioned my name, One Path. I always want to talk about this because it actually comes from a quote. For the most part, there's more to it, but the quote from Ram Dass that says, "We're all just walking each other home."
Ooh.
And that's the path. That's
Mm-hmm.
the one path we're on. So you and I are going about it different ways, but we're all still going the same place, whatever we believe in. And so I'm helping people along their journey. It's like I use the example of it's like if you watch eagles flying in the sky going the same direction. They're not in the same turbulence, they're not in the same one, but they're all going the same direction. And that's that one path we're on. And that's what it was for me, and that's really spoke to me that this is why you're here. This is your one journey on this planet in this body. Where they say spiritual beings having a human experience. This human experience is now, and now what I'm here to do is to help people. And I figured out, the one challenge talking about running businesses that I have a note for myself too to say though is that, I've been running businesses for other people for a lot of years really well, making other people money, and that doesn't mean that you can run your own business really well.
Ooh,
You
good
have to be
point.
honest with yourself about that. And that was something that I had to do. I had to be honest with myself and say, you've been running within their parameters. You've been running with that support system.
Yeah.
Now you're on your own to an extent. And what that came down to was, find someone that could help you do that can help you find out what you don't know, right?
Sure.
We don't know what we don't know. And so I made the decision and I said, well, I have these resources, I have this skill set, and I jokingly say, and this is a joke, I jokingly say, I'm just the talent. I need someone to help me with the rest of the stuff, even though it is my business. I want to
Yeah.
help people. I want to help folks on their journey. But to do that, I have to run my business, and so I have to be smart about it. So I got a business coach, which Lynn Grotsky, she's amazing. She literally wrote the book on running a book. She's out on your coast. And then I got a marketing coach recently to help me with that too. So always trust your experts. And so I really leaned on those people that could do the stuff that I wasn't strong at, so I could do what I do.
Hearing you say that is so helpful and I'm sure validating to so many because we were not meant to be experts in everything.
Right.
And it should not prevent us, and it doesn't have to, from utilizing our gifts, contributing to the world in a positive way. And if we let those be stumbling blocks, then it's preventing us from truly helping and being who we're meant to be.
Right.
So I have a lot of respect for that, and it takes some of us a little longer than others to accept that, to identify those people that are going to be part of our core team. And I think a lot of people can find that to be a personal deficit, depending on your personality type and who you are. And it isn't. I almost feel like it comes back to that basic premise of we weren't meant to get through this life alone. And we are capable of so much more when we allow other people in to help us and when we can have this reciprocity. So thank you so much for mentioning that. And I would also go back to what you were saying about your explanation of where the name One Path came from and that description of how we're all going about it in different ways, but that we are all ultimately on the same path. And I was wondering, this thought that I had, if you would agree, that being on that one path that we all having this human experience can relate to, we all kind of have these fundamental needs and these things that we are seeking. And even though that's going to show up for us in different ways, or we may go about it differently, there are some core needs there. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. That's what came to mind for me in that regard.
Something that along those lines that I talk to people about is I talk about the three connections, and that's connection
Mm-hmm.
to self, connection to others, and connection to something bigger than us, source,
Yeah.
spirit, creator, whatever it is. And when we're disconnected from any of those three is when we
Mm-hmm.
struggle. And that's how I help people is those three connections, and really we start off with a connection to self, and that's really going back to your basics and your core and who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Connection to others, as you mentioned, we are wired to be in community.
Yeah.
Community is so important. You mentioned LinkedIn, and that's a huge part of my community is connecting with people there. And
Yeah.
however you connect is very important. Is that community supports you, and you give back to that community, and that community will show up for you. And so I think it's very important that we keep that in mind, that we are separate in a way, but we are
Mm-hmm.
connected, and we all support each other. And just you and I connecting on here is
Mm-hmm.
support. And it's amazing that we can do so.
Agreed.
Kind of off, I kind of lost the ball there, but that's kind of
No,
what came to mind
definitely
when we
missed
talked
it.
about that.
Well, I think that that's really the key. Like, yes, there are things that are out of alignment, and you really succinctly put it. Like, those are definitely three core components that I think we can all relate to and that have significance for us. So I'd love to hear more about your process, but also how people find you. Because when you started to describe what it is that you do, I'm sure that there are some people who are all in and you don't have to explain much and
Right.
they're totally sipping the Kool-Aid. I'm sure that there are other people that might take a little bit of convincing and that some are completely turned off. So how are you finding, in addition to LinkedIn, or how are you using LinkedIn if that's a main source for you of finding the right people to make those connections and find the right fit with clients?
I read a book recently called The Go-Giver, Bob Berg and John David Mann, and I'm very much into giving, and that's the point that the person that recommended it to me was about receptivity, and that's the part I struggle with. I struggle in allowing people to give me that gift, and we forget that allowing someone to give you a gift is a gift for them as well. And I struggle with that, and so that's one of the 5 laws that they talk about in that book, and it's very important. But the quote that I wrote down from there is the true measure of your success is how much more value you give for what you are paid. And the reason I mention that is because it's about giving. And so how I'm finding people is through things like this. You're giving to me, and I'm hopefully giving value to you and your audience, and showing up like that and allowing people to see me and hear what I have to offer. Alignable, there's a website, and it's just small business owners, so it's not a real wide site, but I haven't found much. I haven't used it right for the threads. However, I'll say that. But for the connections, I get 10 free connections a month, and I look through there, and I look for people that are local, people that are, even though I can help, one time earlier this year, I had more clients out of state than I do in state. Wow. I had, I'm in California. I had one in Southern California, a couple in Virginia, etc. But I still network local because I am, local, and that tends people to be a little more open if you're a local business than if you're like, hey, I'm Jason and I'm from 10 states over, let's meet. Sometimes it's a little challenging. Now we've met this way, and that's the beauty of LinkedIn. But so Alignable is really great for me. I've had people that have shown up and been referral partners for me that way. Some people show up. And I do a couple local events. I do some in person. I do all my one-on-one sessions. I do through HIPAA certified site. I'm not bound by HIPAA, but some people just like that extra security in there. Yeah. And but I also do local events. So I do 2 free events a month, and I do one's coming up. It's online, and it's forgiveness. I'm trained a little bit in Huna, and it's called Ho'oponopono, and it's about forgiveness. And so I do a live event once a month with that. And then on Sundays, once a month, I do a walking meditation course based on the work of Thich Nhat Hanh. And just get in front of people and just kind of share who I am and what I'm about, and let them decide, let them see do they think I'm a good fit before we have that conversation to see if I think they're a good fit for me. Sure. And, it all comes down to that trust. Yeah. And, talking about being compassionate, being genuine, having integrity, it's very important. And I think that that's why I love stuff like this, because hopefully that comes through. Hopefully, your audience sees that I am who I am. I'm authentic. I'm Jason. I'm doing my thing, and whatever I've been called on to do, and whatever talents I have, and my training and all that, I'm here to help. I'm here to serve. I'm here to show people, and hopefully that comes across. And so by doing that, that's how people show up for me.
I love all that you said, because as mental health practitioners specifically, the majority of us really struggle, and I'm sure in other professions as well, with marketing. It doesn't come naturally, and promoting ourselves can feel really uncomfortable. And you found a way to do that I don't think would rub people the wrong way. And in listening to you, I'm thinking that's so doable. And a lot of what I do myself that I've had the best results with, we don't necessarily remember what it is that people did. It's how they made us feel. And the way to convey that is to be in their presence. And that's why I love podcasting, and not knocking any other method, right? Posts are important. Blogging is important. But this is such a personal touch when you get to actually see someone's expressions and hand gestures and the inflection in their voice. And so it goes so far beyond just a post, an image, and even something in writing. And so I completely agree, and I'm glad that you've had good luck with that. So this is making me think that throughout your journey and the work that you do and all of these additional trainings and specializations and certifications, what are some things that you could suggest to those listening that are maybe some common themes you find with the clients that you work with, and some strategies or suggestions that you have found to have a positive impact on the majority of the people that you work with?
One of the things that I always start with is awareness. Really being aware of where you're at and being honest about where you're at. And a lot of times we don't. A lot of times we have these stories we tell ourselves, and all life is story. I have my indigenous background trainings and also Jungian psychology, right? It's all life is story. And so it's the story you're telling yourself. So really starting with an awareness of truly where you're at and what you want. That's the first step that's really positive to helping people. Focusing on what you do want and not what you don't want. I leave every first session with my clients. That is their homework, is to focus on what they do want and not what they don't want. And for the scientific types, we talk about the different parts, but I say, it's about, what you focus on is what you show up. And the spiritual folks, energy goes where attention or energy flows where attention goes. But what you focus on shows up. So if you're focusing on what you don't want, guess what the universe is going to give you? More of what you don't want. And so really focusing on what you do want. And if you find yourself focusing on negatives, catch yourself and say, okay, then what do I want? And make it a positive and say, okay, I do want this, because that's the challenge, right? I think working with clients, we all would find that they can make a laundry list of what they don't want in their lives. And it's good to get that out, because it's good to hear how their brain works and what they're thinking and how they works, but then say, okay, well, then what do you want? So focusing on what they do want, that's the second part. And the third thing, it's a little bit deeper, but look at your beliefs, looking at your values, looking at, and really, I kind of tongue in cheek, but honestly, 2 years ago, I made National Beliefs Day. That's my own little holiday. And and on that same day every year, I promote it. And it's like, just look at one belief you have and see where it came from. Because I just wrote an article today about, Massey, and talking about, the imprint stage and the modeling stage and the socialization stage, where we're imprinted with all this stuff in our lives, and where these beliefs come from. Just take a look at and say, I have a strong belief about this, but where did that really come from? Is it something that I heard and I was told, and, oh, well, the Jurados, we don't show emotion or whatever, and that, where did that come from, and does that serve me? And be able to look at that is so powerful. It will help you shift your life for sure.
That's incredible. What is the date for National Belief Day?
I have to look it up. As I was talking, I was like, oh no, she's going to ask me what the date is. It's early.
I'm going to look it up and do my homework, and I'm going to add it to the show notes, because I want to make sure that gets recognized.
It's early in the year. It's like in March, I think it is. It's like
Wonderful.
The first Monday. So I'll share that. But yeah, it's so important. And it's just, it's so, as you know, our values and our beliefs are, our beliefs roll into our values. And it's so important to be able to look at that.
I couldn't agree more. Those are some great tips and takeaways for the listeners. So is there anything that you are currently working on that you would like to share? You mentioned that you do these free appearances, and I'm happy to share that. Obviously, you're on the other coast, but, podcasts help us to be widespread. But anything that you have currently working on that you'd like to share?
So I do this, the forgiveness event, and it's all based on Ho'oponopono. And we kind of go through the definitions of forgiveness and kind of talk a little bit about it and the different degrees of forgiveness and where it shows up in our lives. And then letting them kind of let things from the past go. And the key about forgiveness is that it's not about saying what the other person did was appropriate or right. It's about allowing you to release that burden of holding that on. They kind of, the light way of saying it is that that person's living rent-free inside your head. And so we kick them out. And we say, because you're forgiving the part of them that's inside of you. And you're forgiving that part. And everything else goes from there, but just by doing that, so it's a beautiful process, and I'm very happy to be able to share that with people. I do also work with a couple of veterans groups, but they're within the veterans groups. I worked with a group called Beekeeping for Veterans, and it's a Canadian group started by an American that helps veterans both in the United States and in Canada and they set them up to do beekeeping to help for mindfulness. And I do meditations for them. And that's a lot of fun. I do that, but that's kind of a closed group. I got permission from Mattis, who runs it, to share the meditations that I record on my own YouTube page. So they're out there if people want to check them out.
Great.
And that's kind of the gist of what I'm doing right now.
Wonderful. Exciting stuff. Well, I'll make sure to include all those details. So what is the best way for people to see what you're up to, work with you if they choose, and follow along on what's going on in your journey?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I love to connect with people. Community is very important to me, and I'm very active, like I said, on LinkedIn. My company is One Path Coaching, and that's kind of all across the board. So it's all written out, the words, onepathcoaching.com, onepathcoaching@gmail.com. They can definitely email me directly. I would love to chat with them. If you go to my website, it has all my social media on there, and you can just click on there and kind of see what I'm up to in that realm.
I would highly encourage the listeners to follow you. It's great content. So thank you for all that you do, for sharing your journey, for all that you give, and for being on the show today. It was great having you.
Thank you. And I'm so glad you brought me on here and we were able to connect. It's been fun.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.